Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to episode 85 of the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, political scientist at Lund University. Connect with the show on Twitter by following us at SMNP Podcast or visit us on the web at socialmediaandpolitics.org. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in. As you might have picked up on the intro, I have changed universities from Copenhagen to Lund University in Sweden. PhD is done, and now I'm starting a 2-year postdoc, continuing on the same research path and continuing, of course, with this podcast. So no big changes there, except the release schedule might be a bit slower in the summer as everyone's on vacation. But I have an excellent interview to bring to you today. It is with Alexandra Ekkelenkamp. She is an advisor to the Director for Media and Communication at the Council of the European Union. And what I think is fascinating and so on point in this interview is the way that Alexandra connects the work of the council itself to its strategic communication strategy. So not divorcing the communication from the actual operation. And that's something that we talked about in our previous episode, looking at how campaigning candidates can create authenticity by matching their communication with the candidate, him or herself. And so I think this interview really puts that in an institutional context, but also we go all over the place and we talk about narratives at the local versus European level. We talk about the use of data for institutional communication, and then going beyond institutions. As part of Alexandra's work, she helps run the social media for the council's president, Donald Tusk, and we talk about his successful Instagram account and cross-platform strategy and some comments he made recently that went viral. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Alexandra Ekkelenkamp. She is an advisor to the Director for Media and Communications at the Council of the European Union. Alexandra, thanks so much for taking the time out. Welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast.
Thank you.
So why don't we talk a little bit about your background? You've been in the sort of digital communication space for about 10 years now. Mm-hmm. How did you get started and sort of what type of work are you doing today?
So actually, it was a bit of an accident, really. I studied history in university, and for the longest time, I thought I was going to pursue a PhD and become a historian. And then I realized when I was writing my master's thesis that was way too lonely, and I felt like I didn't have enough sort of real life impact. And I realized that having spent some time abroad as a child and later during my studies, I realized that I flourish in an international context. So I decided to pursue an international career, and I did a traineeship with the European Parliament, the press office. This was in 2007, so this was before social media was really used by the EU institutions. Worked in Japan for a while, and then I joined the Dutch government in 2009. Sort of, by accident, I had helped them out with some events, and I was asked to apply, and I ended up in a communications post. I was a press officer dealing with press communication, but also public information, organizing events. And so this was 2009, and at the time, we were rethinking our communications campaigns, really. And we realized that the audience that we wanted to talk to, so I was promoting, at the time, actually, I was promoting EU careers in the Netherlands. We realized that sort of young professional audience was not just reading newspapers, but they were actually on social media. So this led me to start pioneering social media use in the Dutch government in 2009, when it was not very widespread. This was 1 year after Obama did use it in his campaign. So it was not completely, not an alien idea to use it as a government organization, but still it was quite new. And it worked really well for us. And I did that for 4 years. And then I came to Brussels in early 2013. I was hired as a press officer dealing with crisis communication and social media. So I was pretty much sleeping with my phone next to me all the time. I was working crazy hours, nights, weekends. At the time, I was primarily dealing with social media for Herman Van Rompuy, the European Council president. I was also doing corporate social media and press. This was a one-woman show, very much. And it was just me doing it for a number of years. Fascinating to do. Got to witness some historic events, I believe. We organized the G7 summit with then President Obama present, which was fantastic. We had a lot of crisis summits in the summer of 2015 due to the Greek crisis, migration, etc.
That's right. That was all around that time.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I had very little sleep that summer, let me tell you. And then I changed jobs again in 2016. I was asked to apply for the position of advisor to the director for media and communications. Basically, this was also, the director was hoping to sort of bring that sort of relatively new social media knowledge into the heart of communications. And so I moved to his office. My successor took over part of my tasks. So he remains responsible for the social media presence of Donald Tusk. So I managed Donald Tusk's social media presence for a couple of years, and then he took over. And we've spread out the rest of the work so that now, rather than having one person do all of the social media, we have a group of people doing it. And that's led to an explosion in creativity. We've been able to scale it up. We're operating at a different level from where we were before because we're taking it seriously, frankly. That's what we're doing. And so my role now is to think about communication in a strategic way. So I wrote the new communication strategy for the Council Secretariat 2 years ago, which has digital at its heart, I would say. So rather than having separate web and social media strategies, we try to really have an integrated approach that includes everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask you about your current work, but I have one
Sure.
curious question about the Dutch government and your work with
Yes.
that, because it was actually when I started getting into the social media research, and everyone was studying Twitter because of the open data, and the kind of criticism was that Europeans aren't really on Twitter. But I remember at that time, the Dutch were very active disproportionately on Twitter. So do you think that had an effect on adopting the social media technology so early?
Yeah, probably, because I think good communication is audience driven, and we took the time at the time to do a lot of research on our audiences before we made decisions on where to put our money and our resources. So social media, clearly to us, it was very obvious that was being used in the Netherlands quite widely. Not just Twitter, I would like to add, also Facebook. And at the time, there was also a sort of a Dutch national network, which has disappeared, so we didn't really invest in that. But so absolutely. And I think Twitter is still quite popular in the Netherlands compared to other EU countries. Yeah, it's social media in general, I think, is very popular in the Netherlands. People are very digital. We're digital at an early stage as well. So.
Yeah, the Dutch are definitely high tech.
Yeah.
So let me ask a bit. Working at in the EU Council, it's quite a technocratic, very high level organization, right? A lot of heads of state meeting behind closed doors and things like that. So how are you approaching social media in that regard, in terms of kind of dealing with the public and communicating policy and what's going on, but also keeping this type of, I don't want to say hierarchy is maybe not the right word, but this type of legitimacy, I guess, as being a very serious organization with a lot of power?
Yeah. So I don't think we're technocratic, really. We're very political, though. And I think our legitimacy is tied to us taking communication seriously. One of the reasons we are on social media is that we believe it strengthens our legitimacy as an institution, because what happens, we host meetings of ministers and leaders, as you said. What happens is these people, they go into a meeting room, and already in the back of their minds, they're thinking, how am I going to explain the compromise I reach or the decisions that I take to my constituency? That's top of mind for them. And so it needs to be top of mind for us. And a lot of political leaders and ministers are on social media. They have their presence. That's where they directly engage with their constituency, with their citizens. So for us, it's not a contradiction at all, actually. Social media is a communication tool like any other. It's where the people are, and we need to be there because that is actually part of our legitimacy. Yeah,
it's interesting. And I mean, when you're dealing with or working for a transnational organization, I'm thinking about what you just said about constituencies. How do you translate some of the communication that you're trying to get out when the public comes from 28 different countries?
That's a massive challenge, especially when resources are limited. So we see ourselves as the house of the member states. So this is where, your minister and your prime minister or president is making decisions on your behalf, basically. So that's really what we want to show. But we have limited resources, and initially we were doing, I think, most of our social media communications in English only, and that has a limited impact. I mean, it is a language that's widely spoken, but not everywhere. And also, when you want to do communication that's appealing on an emotional level, asking people to sort of, already overcome the hurdle of doing it in a second language, that's tricky. So increasingly, we're not just translating, but really localizing content. So we're telling stories that appeal on a local level. Just to give you one example, we have a series of videos that we're releasing this year. They're called Europeans, but with capital E and U. And these are stories from 28 countries. We've followed European citizens, so one from each country basically, telling their personal story. So we have musicians and researchers and this car mechanic who did an internship abroad and stuff like that. And we have them tell their story in their own way. And then we show how EU policy making and how the work of the council supports that. So for us, it's all about actually showing the national dimension. And so that's one example of a campaign that we're running. But if you look at our day-to-day work, it's very much national because, when we organize a summit, afterwards, there's going to be 28 press briefings by 28 leaders. They all tell their own story in their own language. So for us, it's sort of baked into the nature of the institution, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to pick up on something that's kind of related to that, something you mentioned in your talk, which was that instead of controlling a narrative on social media, that people are going to be talking about you, and there's going to be a sort of organic conversation about European affairs, about the council, that you have to find your way into those conversations. So I think it connects with this idea of if you have so many different constituencies, then there's no overarching narrative or very few overarching narratives that would connect with everyone in every constituency. So, for example, one of the things that I'm quite critical of is when you have, let's say, an EU institution that's trying to really promote a value or an idea that, of course, is not going to be accepted by every single person in the European Union. Mm-hmm. So there's conversations going on in different spheres, different platforms, and then how do you connect with them and sort of be responsive rather than having a mapped out strategy that you then try to implement over, 9 months in 3 phases, for example?
Well, actually, I think we're saved by the nature of our institution because the work that we do, all these political meetings that we host, really, that's the core of what we do and that's what we talk about. So it's really difficult, if not impossible, for us to roll out a long-term campaign that pushes certain ideas or values because that's not how the council operates. Mm. We are where member states meet, and obviously there is, a leader's agenda. There are some strategic guidelines that come from our 28 leaders, and we do try to talk about that. But we tell people, look, this is what your leader, your prime minister has been discussing, has been deciding on your behalf. So we take our cue from that. We don't have any programs ourselves that we can promote. We can just talk about what happens in the council. And the main thing that we're trying to do, it's really simple, but it works really well. It's just showing people, why does it matter? When I don't know, agriculture ministers meet and they discuss fishing quotas, what does that actually mean? And why does it matter to you? And what impact will it have? We try to explain that in a way that's not burying people in fact sheets, but we try to really tell stories around that. So in that sense, we're really guided by what ministers and leaders are doing at the council, yeah.
And I want to pick up on a couple of the concepts you were talking about in the talk, mm-hmm. and I'm still on this idea of constituencies, and you mentioned being data-driven.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as to what type of data research you're doing, and are you doing any type of audience research on those communities in order to better tell a story, make it more effective?
Yes, absolutely. So ideally, we want to talk to all 500 million Europeans. But we don't have the resources, nor the budget, the staff, whatever. We can't do that. We just don't have that kind of operation. So we have to go through multipliers like journalists, like diplomats, like academics, movers, shakers, thinkers. We have to, first talk to people who then, talk to their constituencies, if you will. So we've defined a few key audiences for us that we believe can take our message further. And because we've defined them, we can study them and we can interview them. We can, we do all kinds of user research. So we'll do, some of it is just looking at our website statistics and our social media statistics and just continuously improving our performance there. But we also do surveys. We bring people in for discussions. Even on a very technical level, we have people come in and use our website and test how quickly do you find stuff on our site and track people's eye movements as they look at our site. So we do all kinds of research because we really know who the core audiences are, and we just continuously test with them, is this working? Do you like this? Does this work for you? Yeah.
And I'm guessing to some extent that would help promote, I'm talking about this a lot on the show, authenticity and the connection with social media, right? So on the one hand, and I want to ask you a little bit about your thoughts on authenticity, but I guess specifically first, can a better optimized website or a sort of user experience help somehow contribute to authenticity, do you think?
Okay, so I'm going to use a metaphor here.
Okay.
Let's say that you have a fantastic race car driver, just top of the line, best driver ever, and you put them in, I don't know, an old Volkswagen Beetle. Compare that to a Ferrari. And for me, that's really what data-driven communication is and what optimizing the website is. It's authenticity is the driver. That's the person that you work for. That's the organization. That's the key message that you have. And then you can put that person in a shabby car or in a really fast car. And that's what we do when we optimize our social media and we optimize our website. So our role as communication experts is to advise our principals so that they have the best solutions possible to achieve their aims. But in the end, authenticity comes from the people actually speaking, actually communicating. So if we take the case of Donald Tusk, for example, we've advised him on, this is how you do Instagram best, and this is what works, and this is what doesn't work. And we can talk to him about, and his staff about formats and, what's the best time to post or whatever. But we're not going to tell him what to say. For me, that's the crucial difference.
Because that allows for the authenticity to sort of come out.
Exactly.
Interesting. So let's keep on this idea. I'm curious to ask you a few questions about, on the one hand, working with the official EU Council handles and on different platforms that they're on, and then President Tusk himself. I mean, are there any differences there between the institutional communication and the actual personal communication?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we want the institutional communication to really, it just needs to reflect what happens in the Council of the EU and the European Council. So it's very factual. It's not very political, actually. It's really fact-driven, but we do try to do that in a way that is attractive and engaging to people. So we do tell stories, but if you look carefully at what we do there, most of it is less political, although we do use those platforms to amplify political messaging coming from Donald Tusk.
I was going to ask, the two reinforce each other.
They reinforce each other, exactly. So it's Donald Tusk and it's the rotating presidency who do political messaging, and we support that through our corporate accounts. But our corporate accounts also have a very important didactic function, where we just, as I said earlier, we just sort of explain why it matters, what happens in the council. So we try to lay the groundwork and provide all the relevant facts and information. But then, of course, the political flavor has to come from Donald Tusk. Yeah, for sure.
And for the council, I mean, is this ongoing or rolling mission? Because I know of some other institutions that, let's say around the European Parliament elections, they have a big push. Whereas, I mean, I guess the council has events that are regular, but it's a sort of never-stopping job.
Never stopping, no.
So it's a constant strategy. Sticking on the idea of Donald Tusk, I was just checking out on Instagram. He has 1 million followers on Instagram. That's a lot. Is that a recent development? Like when he came into the presidency, was there a big jump, or was it just sort of over time collecting followers?
We launched the account a year ago. Huh?
Really?
So really not at the start of his presidency at all, a year ago. And it grew exponentially. Yeah. We've seen steady growth, but really like exponential growth. So yeah, that's 1 year. 1 year's worth.
And what do you attribute it to?
That's a really good question. I think it is a blend of a couple of things. I think, first of all, it's him. He is very authentic, I think, on his Instagram account. It's people get to see him as a person, as a human being. They get to see not just, him in a suit shaking hands, but they get to see him interact with his family and, at leisure as well. So we do show him the way he is. And that's really authentic and engaging. What's also really interesting is that it is very political. It's not just, happy or soft communication. It is very political. And in some cases, his Instagram stories have been picked up by media as well. So there is that. And that's the second factor. And I think the third is just high production value. And there we come in, we make it look the right kind of professional. Instagram always has to have a bit of a sort of authentic edge, not gritty per se, but it has to look real. So it can be over-polished, and we're not doing that at all. But we are making sure that it's professional. Mm-hmm. So the visuals are good photography, good videos. There's a lot of thought put into the stories that we tell on Instagram.
Yeah, because there's a curious dynamic where, on the one hand, you were talking about it in your talk, you don't need to have a mapped out social media strategy, written handbooks and all this stuff. And then on the one hand, one can interpret that as saying like, oh, well, it's quite easy because you just let the candidate be themselves. And you just make sure the shots are right. It's vertical, not horizontal video, whatever.
Yeah.
But clearly there is a lot of thought that goes into it. So where is the brain power going and the production value when the candidate's supposed to be the star of the show?
I wanted to provoke a little bit in my talk today, and that's why I said you don't need a strategy. I think the problem with strategies is that they represent an old school approach where you sit behind your desk and you think about all the possible eventualities that could happen, and you write this one brilliant strategy, and that's going to carry you through the next 5 years. And that's set in stone, and it must be in this way. Now, you can do that to some extent if you write something that's a bit more general, like for general comms, but you can't for social because it changes all the time. So the way we work is that we are very strategic in everything we do, even though we might not write a strategy per se. Now, linking that to sort of the authenticity of the person whose social media you're managing, we've always tried to stay very clear to what he wants and who he is as a person. And having worked for both Herman van Rompuy and Donald Tusk, I can see the difference, different styles, different ways of communicating, so different approaches from us. We do put a lot of thought in the stories that we tell, but it's a continuous dialogue, really, with Tusk and with his team. We keep talking. So I remember when we pitched his Instagram account a little over a year ago, we studied a lot of other best practices, and then we presented him with what we thought suited his personality and his, I hesitate to say brand, but his brand best. Right. And he said, yes, that's a good idea. Let's go for it. And yeah, we've been building on that, but we keep thinking about, what works, what doesn't work. We observe trends as well. And we know him very well. This is his second mandate. We've been working for him for quite some time. So it's not something that you can capture in a strategy per se. It's almost like intuition, like just knowing really well who you work for. Mm-hmm. And then letting that inform everything you do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. And, I guess if you were pitching an Instagram account to him, I'm sure there was at least some degree of resistance or some thinking through whether it was a good move. Do you think he's come around to Instagram as a platform?
He was not resistant at all.
Oh, he wasn't? Okay.
No. When I say pitching, we were not pitching the idea of doing it in the first place. That came from him and from his team. We were pitching the approach. Yeah, we were telling him, this is how we think you should be doing it. So there was no resistance on his part.
Yeah, and this is something we were talking about a little bit earlier, but I just want to put out there for the listeners because I strongly believe in this. If you're working for, whether it's an institution or a candidate or an NGO, I think crucially, I think what you were saying about strategies and sort of it's taking up resources, basically, when you're writing out strategies before you're implementing them. When you have a new feature of a platform, adopt it, right? How have you experienced that in your work?
We constantly test new ideas. We have test accounts on social media, and we just play around with new features. We make sure that our staff are very knowledgeable, so we send them to conferences and trainings and make sure that their skills are really up to date. The people working on our social media, they tend to be a bit geeky, which I think is definitely a pro. And a lot of innovation actually comes from our teams where they say, oh, we've noticed people are doing this now on Instagram, or we've noticed that feature being rolled out. Shall we play with it? And then we say, yeah, sure. I think the crucial word is play. And this is anathema to a lot of government organizations. But honestly, playfulness, playing is, I think, the key to being really good at social media, because it always evolves. And in a way, it's intuitive as well. And it's mobile. You need to just experiment a lot. And that's what we do. And we have sort of safe test environments in which we do that. And if we believe that it works for us, we'll roll it out, yeah.
Do you what you mean safe test environments?
Like anonymous accounts and stuff like that.
Okay, interesting. I was wondering about these sort of focus groups and user design stuff you were talking about earlier. Do you run these sort of A/B tests before going to the larger follower base?
We do A/B tests mainly on our website, I think. I think we even run these tests as we already roll things out, not just before.
Right.
Yeah.
Just kind of seeing how it goes.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to talk about this, but I think we have a lot of British listeners, and if we were talking about Donald Tusk, I think it would be remiss not to talk about the special place in hell for Brexiteers comment, which absolutely went viral on social media. And can you tell us a bit about that experience and what it was like? Because I'm not personally following Donald Tusk, but that was almost on every platform that I saw.
Yeah.
So how did that go down? What was the reason behind it? Was that a spontaneous thing that he just was angry in the moment and sort of blew up? Or was that part of try to get something out there for the media or something like that?
Are you asking me about the tweet or?
I'm thinking of the video that was going around. But I think it was in a press conference where he had laid out the speech, and then I just remember seeing it floating around on Facebook or Twitter.
To be completely honest with you, I don't know. I don't think that was a spur of the moment thing. But I honestly don't know. So here's something that I think is important to remember. If you read the full quote, it doesn't stop after the word Brexit. It's really about this special place in hell being intended for Brexiteers without a plan, basically. And I thought it was interesting to note also that the full quote was read out in the House of Commons during the debate. Yeah, this was, if you consider the context, this was a press statement with the Irish Taoiseach. And
but how did, so you're coming...
It's very clear, yeah.
Yeah, you're coming from, doing some work around crisis communication. Yeah. And I don't think it's necessarily a crisis, but it was definitely a sort of viral moment.
Yes.
So how do you, first of all, I'm just curious, what happens when something just starts going out there, when it starts hitting that viral? I guess notifications start blowing up. Do you have an alert when something happens? Or, it doesn't have to be this example, but let's say something just starts going. How does you and your team respond?
Well, here's the thing. Yes, we have social media monitoring tools. We get alerts when things blow up, but usually we are quicker than the alerts because we're just always on social. We have a fantastic media monitoring team who do social media monitoring as well. And they're just ahead of the game. It's really, really incredible. Yeah, when things snowball, so the speech that Tusk did, it blew up. It was really big, but it was important political messaging. And I think everything he does is very considered. Now, we've had other crises, genuine crises, like, for example, the Brussels attacks in 2016, with one of the attacks happening very close to our building. There, of course, you need to have crisis management mechanisms in place so that you communicate very quickly to people and to the hundreds, if not thousands of delegates in your building, what's happening. So there, of course, we have, crisis structures and rapid response and lines to take and all that sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know what you really, what are you genuinely interested in? What do you want to know?
What I'm interested to know is I've never had a post go completely viral or even close to viral, right? Oh. But if I have a high performing post, I'm kind of monitor it, check in, see how many likes you got, and stuff like that. But I can imagine just when you're, dealing with such a large audience and across platforms, and let's say it just starts going viral. How do you and your team? Is there a bat signal that goes out? You all come together and break down what do we do? How do we? Oh,
in that sense, listen. I think one of the things we're getting really good at is keeping people in the loop. So before something goes viral, all the right people know what's going on. So that when a post goes viral, our press officers are not surprised by it. They've been aware that this is happening. I think that's really important, sort of making sure that you trust your people, that you share information with your people, and that everybody knows what to do in a situation like that. Who takes care of what. And I mean, when we have something political that really goes viral, then we get a lot of calls from journalists, of course, and we get a lot of emails. And we have fantastic professional press officers who can deal with that. There's clear lines to take. That's not really an issue,
And that kind of feeds into the classic media training, right? So you have the social media side, but then you have a kind of trained classic mainstream media.
I think our strength is that social media is fully integrated. It's a strength born out of a weakness, because the weakness was that until I changed jobs in 2016, I was the single point of failure because I was the social media person. There was nobody else. And then when I moved to my current post, the model that I proposed to the director and that he ended up adopting was to have people in all teams active on social media. So we have a couple of web editors who manage our corporate accounts. We have a couple of press officers who deal with President Tusk's presence and our press presence on social media. And we have a very strong audiovisual team that has sort of integrated social media production in their overall production workflow. So when they produce our audiovisual materials, we are the host broadcaster, for example, for summits. So they have to deliver raw footage, then they make edited materials, and they integrate social media production in their workflow. And because it's integrated, it's embedded in all of these teams, and we encourage people's creativity and good ideas, I think there's a lot of the different disciplines bleeds into the social media team, if you will. So we have media-trained people working on social. We have digital experts working on social. We have audiovisual people working on social. So in that sense, it really works for us.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, hearing about the sophistication of the operation is fascinating. And I'm wondering why more politicians don't do this, right? I mean, obviously, Tusk is in he's in a high position and everything, but the type of team that you're talking about, we might expect to see during a political campaign, for example, where people are, really hustling to get out there. I think you mentioned the diplomacy guys in your talk. We had them on the show where they found that 1/3 of the accounts of world leaders close, after campaign periods.
True.
So I guess my question is first of all, why aren't more European political leaders taking this operation seriously and having a full team behind them? Is it just a matter of resources, or is it also a matter of will, do you think?
That's a really good question. I think the ones who do take it seriously know that it cannot be a one-way street. Because I think one of the reasons that so many politicians' accounts are not even properly shut down, but just abandoned after election periods, and then sometimes even restarted during the next election, is that they're only on social media when they want something from people.
Exactly.
And I think the politicians who get it are the people who want to be in continuous conversation with their constituencies, like Macron and Kurz. They're very active, very engaging on social media, but also, it's not just about vote for me, but it's about keep talking to me, keep helping me be a better leader or helping me shape policy. I think that's, if you look at those who do it well, who do get it, that's, I think, a crucial factor, that they understand and really want to stay in touch with the people who got them there in the first place.
This is making me think about the early days of the internet and the technological optimism, right? The early promise of using social media as a way to be a better representative in democracy. Yeah. So have you become more optimistic through your experiences the past couple years? Once you had a little bit of resources about the potential of these tools for democracy and governance? Now we're getting into more political science questions. I can imagine being, crisis communication, one-woman band, running around to, once you're doing it right? You're getting engagement, you're on multiple platforms, You have an institution and the leader working together kind of in synergy with all the audiovisual in place. I'm wondering why more people just don't do that.
Well, I have to say, okay, so these are two different questions. So talking about the last one, why more people don't do that? I think we've hit a sweet spot. I think we are unique in the sense that we're right in the... So here's the thing, we're not very big. It's a new institution. We are 3,000 people. We're 1/10 of the European Commission. So we're not very big. We do have hierarchy, but we don't have a lot of bureaucracy. I think there is a distinction to be made there. We have a short, lean sign-off structure, and we're very political by nature. And that sort of puts us in an interesting position to do social media well and to do it authentically and to do it in a way that's politically engaging. The flip side of that is that we don't have a ton of resources. So we do have to make do with, I wouldn't call it as a shoestring operation at all, but we have to be very efficient with our resources, and we are. I think we've been able to turn that weakness into a strength because we are very discerning about where we put our money. And that's, I think, what also inspired our data-driven approach, is that we don't have a lot of money and resources to burn. We have to be very, very careful with how we invest. But yeah, I think we're just at a sweet spot of not being too big, but being big enough, being at an interesting place, interesting political level. That sort of enables us to do what we do. And I don't think a lot of organizations are placed like we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear about, this idea of being playful, being flexible. I think definitely the nature of the institution matters a lot in this regard. But I think you're well positioned moving forward to be responsive to changes in the platforms because they're happening all the time, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, as a sort of final question, to get your take on where you think things are going. Do you have longer term visions about things you'd like to do, or where maybe the platforms are moving? Kind of how do you see this type of communication in the next, say, year or two?
Year or two.
Year or two.
That's a safe horizon. I'm glad you're not asking me about the 5 years.
No, we're not getting into AR and VR and all that stuff.
Yeah, I would have expected it to happen by now, but it hasn't taken off. Well, I see a mixed picture. I think there's a lot of potential for us. We can reach out to people in creative ways, which is very good. We'll continue to focus on audiovisual innovation for sure, digital innovation, everything we do. We'll just, I think the great thing about having continuous innovation as your motto is that you can keep on doing it indefinitely. So that's what we will be doing. What really, really, really concerns me is the lack of transparency of most social media platforms, especially Facebook and, of course, Instagram, because they're owned by Facebook. That really, really worries me. What that will do to our democracies. Some of the new ad restrictions that were put in place by Facebook.
Yeah, can you talk about those? Because I don't think everyone kind of knows what's going on.
Okay, I can definitely talk about those. So basically what happened is after the political developments over the past few years, I think all social media platforms realized that they have a role to play in taking some responsibility for limiting the influence of bad actors, if you will, ahead of elections. Different platforms took different measures. Facebook chose as one of their measures to limit political advertising in the EU. The problem is, I personally feel that they failed to recognize the unique nature of the EU, the fact that we have an internal market and that we do have a European political sphere. So, for example, we have European political parties who want to advertise across Europe or across the EU. The new rules introduced by Facebook make that virtually impossible because anything that Facebook deems political, it limits to a national audience only. You can only advertise nationally unless you have people registered on your behalf in all EU countries. Now, we've been talking to Facebook about this and explaining how that negatively impacts the work of the EU institutions. And they've granted us an exception until after the elections, so just to cover this period. And then it's back to their restrictive rules. And what I find worrying is that I feel that Facebook is not recognizing the public sphere in Europe, but also the way the EU operates. It has this very, to me in any case, a very sort of Silicon Valley-based mindset, a very libertarian view of how politics in the state should be. And they try to apply that to an EU context, and it just doesn't work. And I feel that they are not, it seems as if they're just not informed on how we operate as EU institutions, on the actual reality we're facing on the ground. And I also feel that the new rules do not stop bad actors. They can still find ways around the system. It only hurts legitimate campaigns by EU institutions. So for me, that's a real concern. The lack of knowledge of governments that I see in tech companies coming out of Silicon Valley. They act as if they're neutral, as if they're politically neutral, but they're not. They have this libertarian view of society. We all know, for example, that AI is sexist and racist and biased, etc. And I'm seeing some of those biases in social media as well. And we all know that a lot of social media platforms have moderation problems, community management problems. And I don't see that going away. And it's hurting our democracy. It's hurting the diversity of voices that we should have. It's driving people off the platform who should be there. And now with these new ad policies, it's actually, it's negatively affecting the impact that we can have as EU institutions. Yeah. So I see that as a genuine problem, that we're handing over such a big part of the space in which we have our political discourse to companies who don't really care about, they're not journalists. They don't really care about factfulness and truth-finding and all of that. So it's worrying me.
But do you see them, I guess the natural follow-up would be, well, then why don't you just go somewhere else? But is it that...
We are somewhere else. We are everywhere. We still have a very strong media operation. For a summit, we get between 1,000 to 1,500 journalists physically inside our building. We consider journalists to be a crucial audience, and we very much work with them. We work with television, radio, media, what have you. We have a very strong web presence, a website that is our own property, of course, optimized for search engines. We actually, I think one of the reasons why we're robust is that we've diversified across platforms. But you can't deny reality. 4 in 10 Europeans use social media weekly, daily. And a big part of that is Facebook. A big chunk of that is Facebook. If you look at Facebook's market share, it's undeniably true that it's there. We have to be on there. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet 10 out of 10 of those journalists are also on Facebook as well.
They are.
It's difficult to...
Yeah, although journalists are on Twitter, so we can talk to them there as well.
Yeah. Okay, so much for my last question. Last question is, a lot of discussion around Facebook. Obviously, it makes sense in terms of reaching voters in the context of the EP elections. What are your thoughts on Google? I feel like Google kind of gets the takes the back door out every time of these conversations. How do they fit in? There's YouTube, I suppose, but the search engine, is that?
Yes, search engine is of course hugely important. Yeah, we see that a lot of people find information on our website not because they navigate on our website, but because they came across it through Google. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Google is the homepage. And increasingly what we're seeing is that when you Google something, it's not just a list of links anymore. Google distills key information. If you Google Donald Tusk, for example, you'll be presented with a key information on Donald Tusk, like a summary with his photo and everything, just on Google. Mm-hmm. Now, it matters to us where they pull that information.
Right.
And luckily, they pull it from the right source, i.e. his official page. But yeah, Google is huge in people's information consumption. But as you say, more behind the scenes. And YouTube is an interesting platform as well. We're currently underusing it a little bit. We want to think about using YouTube in a much smarter way in future. But this is a resource issue. Honestly, I think what I'm seeing... So this is me completely as an outsider without any knowledge and speaking on, this is personally my own personal view of things, not an official EU view or whatever. But what I'm seeing Google do, I find it fascinating because I get the impression that they're actually trying to pivot towards they're actually looking more at Microsoft and Apple, where they are, and less at Facebook. I get the impression that they really don't want to be seen as a social media company. And if you see what Microsoft and Apple are doing, so Microsoft is a cybersecurity leader, and it's actually drawn up this covenant for cybersecurity, and it's getting all these signatories on board. And Apple has positioned itself as the privacy leader. So both sort of taking the opposite stance compared to Facebook, which is still seen as, this is the company that profits off your personal data. And I think I have the impression that Google seems also to be very interested in what we're doing here in Europe in terms of data protection, privacy. And I have the feeling that Google might actually want to pivot more towards sort of the Apple and Microsoft model of thinking, because also Google has a different relationship with its clients because they run a big operating system as well on mobile devices. They have big email product that they want people to trust. So I get the impression, but this is just my impression, it's not really based on any insider knowledge, but I get a feeling that they're more invested in keeping users' trust and keeping users in being seen as a company with a measure of integrity and responsibility. That's a feeling I get from Google. Yeah. But I think honestly, as EU institutions, we need to be vigilant, and we need to regulate as we would any other company. We need to regulate these companies as well.
And it looks like if it's coming from anywhere, it's going to come out of Europe. And I think the next parliament will play a pretty big role, I think, in that. The next parliament commission.
It's going to be interesting to watch. Yeah.
It will be.
Yeah.
It will be. Well, I think, even though I did have too many cannolis at lunch, I could probably go for one more. But Alexandra, thanks so much for taking the time out and coming on the podcast.
Thanks.
I've just been speaking with Alexandra Ekkelenkamp, advisor to the Director for Media and Communications at the Council of the European Union. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Social Media and Politics podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hold tight if the release schedule is a bit slower in the summer. I'm working on setting up some interviews with academics talking about some new research in the field of social media and politics. So subscribe if you're not already. You can follow us on Twitter at SMNP Podcast. Visit us on the web, socialmediaandpolitics.org. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, signing off from Malmö, Sweden. See you next time.